The good thing about making a game that you think will take a week to make is that when, like all games, it takes 3 times longer than you thought, it still only takes 2 weeks more. So Morphblade, I thought I could do in 1 week. It's now, I'm in week 3. It's basically done. Like just this morning I finished off the last hex type. So it's a game where you create a board for yourself as you move around by deciding what type each hex should be, and what the type determines what weapon you attack with when you're standing there, and also some other functions, like sometimes it's a repair hex or it can be a teleport hex. And I got 5 of those really quickly, and it was just my first 5 ideas really, and I just made them all, and they all worked great, and they all fitted well together. None of them were overpowered, none of them were underpowered. It just kind of was already balanced right from the start. And the 6th one I wanted to do like trap or something. I really like the idea of, there are 3 tiles that are just about attack. When you're on them, it determines how you attack enemies. Then the other 2 of the first 5 are utility ones, where they don't directly attack at all, they're just teleport or repair. Both those work great. And I thought, well, okay, we've got 3 attack ones and 2 utility ones, maybe the 6th one should probably be another utility one. And I liked the idea of something that affects enemies when they walk onto it, because my goal is that the layout of your board should matter a lot. So there's stuff like when you upgrade a hex, the things it can upgrade into are it can hybridize with any of the adjacent hexes. So it really matters what you've put around that hex, and that makes the decision of where to put them. It has more considerations to worry about. Like, it's both, do I want a blades hex there so I can attack enemies, and also do I want it there so I can upgrade this teleporter hex? What if that's the last slot around this teleporter hex, and I want the teleporter hex to have a repair upgrade? I've got to put repair there instead. And then if you also have traps, then it would be stuff like, okay, I want blades there because enemies are going to come in from both directions, but also if I put a trap in front of it, then the enemies that I don't kill with blades attacks like that, would be vulnerable in some way because they're trapped, or I don't have to worry about them because they're trapped. And so for every given set of rules of each hex, there'd be an extra rule to think about like where the traps are. I really like the idea, but it was just a kind of cursed idea. It just wouldn't pan out no matter how I tweaked it and how many ideas. I had about probably more than 12 different trap types that I came up with. And the issue is, the original one was going to be landmines, and they were going to be things that you place it, and then if an enemy moves there, it would just get blown up, and then the landmine would be gone, and then you'd have to go back and rearm it yourself. Problem with that is, what happens if you just make every hex a landmine? Because the way I spawn enemies, I place them on the tiles, and even if I spawn an enemy for every single square on every single hex on the board, every one of them would die, and then the only penalty is you've got to go around and rearm them, which you can do because all the enemies are dead. So that's not great. And yeah, we can have tougher enemies who don't die in one hit from it, but that doesn't scale up as well. You know, the scaling up to deal with the landmine strategy is way harder than scaling up to deal with all the other strategies. It's just way too good. And then I had an idea of like, okay, what if it traps them, and then you've got to spend a turn to kill them, and you don't have to be close, you just have to spend a turn. And then like, if one of them's trapped and the other ones aren't trapped, then spending a turn to kill the trapped one might get you in trouble with the ones that aren't trapped. But of course, if you just make all traps, again, everything's trapped. And yeah, you spend 1 turn to kill one and the other ones are not trapped, but then unless I have filled the entire board with enemies, then when they come towards you, they hit your next set of traps and they get trapped again, you get to kill one, and you just get to kill 1 per turn. And that's too good for too long. It's not the ultimate strategy, it won't win every wave, but it's just sort of better than everything else for the first 70% of turns, basically. So it just kept coming up that like no matter what kind of trap idea I had, if it stops enemies from moving or attacking, or both, it ends up being so powerful that you have to limit it in this really clunky way. I didn't even like the idea of having to reset the traps. It was kind of, I was going to automatically do it between waves, but it's still like, now there's these extra states going on. Like until now, hexes just have a type and that's it. Now they've got to store whether they've been used or not. And if they've been used, then they have this special hidden property that I've got to represent visually somewhere, and it just gets messy. I think every time, I see this in other games as well, like RTSs and, I can't remember what the specific example I was really kind of annoyed about with it, but when a game designer gets really excited about an idea and it's really good, and they put it in, and it's just way too powerful, so the disadvantage has to be enormous, just absurdly disadvantageous. And then it ends up being this kind of wishy-washy thing of like, alright, it's good, but then it's just the penalty's so huge that it's just, I don't really want to use it. So eventually I just realised like this is not elegant. The whole point of this game is it's supposed to be simple and elegant. It's taken me too long. I had to make at least 3 of these types of things to see if they worked, and some of them were fun, but it kind of broke the balance. And eventually the one I come up with is 6th hex, which is hard to say quickly. 6th hex. Is just another attack type. It's called the arrow, and it's one of the first ideas I had actually. And after I made the blades and the hammer, I didn't think I needed another attack type, and I don't need one, but it's a good one. And when I made it, it felt really good. It's you're just like an arrow, and you can attack. You move directly ahead, and the kind of default way to use it is like there's an enemy in front of you, and you move through them to the tile behind them, and that kills them. And then that by itself is very is useless on a small grid. So early on you don't use it because there's no room to move through someone. You can only move to them, and the grid's really small. And it kind of felt like it was lagging behind the other two. Like you'd always rather have a hammer really or a blades. And so I made it so that you can just move 1 square and kill the thing on the square. And I also made it so that if you do move 2 squares, you also kill the thing on the 2nd square. So now it's fucking great. It might be too good, we'll see in testing. I can easily mod that back to, I can rein it in a little bit if it is too powerful. And then if you upgrade it with itself, like everything when upgraded with itself has to become like a better version of itself, like just better at what it already does. And the arrow is like this really interesting kind of mobility power where, for the most part, it's not better at killing than other things, unless you get 2 in a row. But its advantage is that when you're surrounded by enemies, a hammer can take out one of them, but then the other one attacks you. Blades, in some situations you can move away from the enemies and kill one of them without leaving yourself vulnerable to the next one. But in a totally different set of circumstances, the arrow lets you move through someone, kill them, and then also be far enough away from the others that they can't hurt you. And it also just feels so great to be like darting around the board, going shoo, 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 just slaying everything as you do it. So that's cool. The other thing that I really struggled with Morphblade that turned out to be way more work than I thought, or just like my ideas kept being wrong, I had to redo it, was just how enemies spawn. So I was talking about how the arrow was not great because the board was small, and just in general when the board's small it's not super interesting. I want you to go through those early ways quickly and just like murder everything, and almost any setup should work fine. And I had an idea for this, which was that the enemies spawning were kind of like, if you have 2 hexes, which is how it starts, an enemy's got to spawn on the other one, and then you have no room. You literally just have to do what is on the hex that you're on. And that's okay for like wave 1, but then like it restricts how many enemies I can spawn, and then if I want to make the game really hard, I just thought like it would be cool if enemies spawned on their own hexes. We create new hexes outside of your grid. You're building this little thing of weapons, and then we build enemy hexes on the side of it, and then you've got more space in total. And the more enemies we give you, the more space we're giving you. So it kind of would self-balance a little bit and give you some breathing room. Boy, was I wrong about that. That's a complete garbage idea. Because I made it, and then I was trying to use the arrow again, because it was tentative at that time. I really loved the arrow, but it wasn't viable because there wasn't enough room, and I hadn't thought about making it shorter range. So I thought, like, great, this is going to make the arrow much better, because now there's more space. You can zap through someone. And it didn't make it more viable. This is impossible, but it seemed to make it worse. It seemed like it felt even more claustrophobic than it was before, like even more kind of cramped and just difficult to get anything done. And it's because, you can move to the enemy hexes. The enemy hexes are not weapon types for you, they're just blank. And I thought, well, okay, that's not as good as a weapon hex, but it doesn't hurt you, right? You can still move there, just use it for mobility. But being on a hex that does nothing is really bad. Like, if there are enemies near you, then you can push like one of them away, but then it'll attack you on its next turn. And so you're almost certainly going to take damage. So it's like, and the enemies are not affected by that. Like, they don't need the weapons to attack with. They can just attack anyway. So I've made a whole bunch of hexes where the enemies have an advantage over you, whereas previously that was just dead space. And dead space is not not advantageous to the enemy, and B, actually not even neutral. It's actually kind of an advantage for you, because enemies that can push you are very rare. That's kind of a late game type. And for the rest of the game, you can push enemies. And if there's a gap there, that kills them. If there's an enemy hex there, it doesn't. So I just made the game way harder and more oppressive by expanding the space you have to work with, which is totally weird. And that's just, that's a quirk of this type of game about where hexes determine your weapons. And that's such a kind of new idea that it wasn't intuitive to me that giving you extra space could hurt you. So I've kind of switched back to a system where enemies spawn on your grid, but you get a warning now. Because while I was doing that, one of the things that came up was now that I put enemy hexes, now enemies had their own hexes, I wanted to give you a bit of breathing space between waves, and so I had a countdown. It used to be in the top left corner showing you what the countdown was to the next enemy wave. And I realised if I'm showing you where they spawn, I can just have the numbers on the hexes, and that looks really clear. You just get it. When you see a number 3 appears on a hex, and then when you move it goes down to 2, you know something, and it's bright red. You know something's going to happen, like an enemy's probably going to spawn there or something. You shouldn't be standing on that hex in 3 turns time. And if you're wondering, hey, where do the enemies come from, you know it's there and you know when it's going to happen, and it's just super clear. So even once I got rid of the enemy hexes, I think I'm going to keep something like that. Right now it just puts a number on one of your hexes, and several of your hexes, so it's like 3, 2, 1, and so to get off those and get ready. And you also just have time to prep. And so that was really cool. That also was solving another problem. Like, it's so complicated. This is going to be such a simple game, but it's so complicated to make the right simple game. Like, it used to be you had to trigger the next wave manually, and that was quite neat because you built a hex after every wave. You kill a couple of enemies, you build a hex. You kill a couple of enemies, you build a hex. And each time you're choosing what kind of weapon it is. And that had a real kind of, early on that's great because you want to build as many hexes as possible and you have an idea of what kind of grid you want to set up. And then once you've got about 6, you kind of, and it asks you, okay, what hex do you want now? You're like, I don't know, just something. And then get on with the fighting. I want to fight more, I want to level up my hexes more, I want to play on this grid, and then ask me what I want next. So the rate at which you get hexes couldn't be just 1 per wave. That was way too fast. And you can't really make the waves take longer to kill in any neat, elegant way, because it's a very binary game. Like something can hit you that's super bad. Binary is the wrong word because you do have some health, but it's really serious to take a hit at all. So I can't just give you there's 8 enemies, so it's going to take you longer to fight them. Plus, it's not really about the number of enemies or the time it takes. It's more to do with how many decisions you make in a row. You kind of want to make some decisions, then play a while and just get used to it, settle in. So the rate at which you get hexes has to slow down, which is fine. I can do that. But now, how do you trigger the next wave? If you don't get a hex after a wave, how do you tell the game you want the next wave? And I was doing stuff like I was going to have a button for it, like a hex on the grid that you walk to say, yes, I'm ready for the next wave. And then when I introduced enemy hexes, I thought, okay, you just move to any of those. And then once you've moved to it, you kind of trigger it, and then you get off again before it spawns. And yeah, you can hear that sounding messy already, and it was fucking messy, and it could get you killed, and it could break the way new hexes are placed. And it had another hidden state of an enemy hex looks this way before you trigger it, and then it looks a different way after you trigger it. And it wasn't intuitive really to walk into enemy territory to make enemies happen. And so that's where the countdown came from. It was okay, what if we just, when you're not getting a hex, rather than making elaborate systems for you to choose when to get the next wave, we just spawn it in 3 turns. You don't have much to do between waves. You want to get to a healing hex if you're damaged. I'm letting you respec hexes so you can change their purpose, but that doesn't take any turns necessarily. Or it doesn't have to. I can make it take them if I think that's good for balance, but there's no real time limit. It's a turn-based game. You can take as long as you like to think about it, and then we might as well just spawn the next wave in 3 turns. And so that's where the countdown came from, and that feels great. It was bizarre how much better that made the game. It was just pacey, which is a strange term in turn-based, but you actually you're kind of itching for the next wave, and because it's so responsive and fluid in terms of how it responds to your clicks, that's never annoying. In some turn-based games, it would be annoying to have to pass 3 turns for something to happen, but in this you just click 3 times. Doesn't matter where you click, just go boom, 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 and and you're done. You click on yourself 3 times if you like, so you can wait. And there's no processing time, there's no delay, nothing ever stops you from interacting because it hasn't finished animating or hasn't finished doing this. As soon as you click, we skip to what you want to do and we do it. And that's kind of, I don't know what is going on psychologically there, but it really like makes you kind of hungry. It helps, like killing things feels quite good in this game. That was one of the first things that kind of clicked about it. And when you've got a delay, but the delay is totally up to you how long it takes in real time to pass, 3 turns, it encourages you to click through it quickly, and then you kind of get stuck in, really. It's like click, 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 boom! Because you know where they're coming from, you know what weapon you're going to kill them with, and so you're just really ready to do it. The fact that you have to kind of summon it by bringing it on faster than normal is great. So that is almost working perfectly. The only thing I want to tweak is that right now they just spawn on your hexes. What I quite like to do is, it's kind of better if they come from the edges of the map anyway, so if they come from from like a hex that's adjacent to some empty space. Just that's how it used to work originally, and it felt good. And right now I'm just picking random hexes, and it's not much worse, but it's probably better if they come from the edge. And I thought, okay, actually, we have another problem where what happens if you're standing on the hex that they're going to spawn on. Like, we can show a countdown on you, but it gets a bit messy when we're trying to show like the number 3 on top of you, on top of the symbol for the weapon you're using, on top of all its upgrade information and all that stuff. And then, like, if you do wait there, should you be killed? Right now you are killed, and it's a bit... Alan Hazelden is on me to be less friendly to the player, because I'm always very forgiving. I always want to, like, let's not kill you unless you really, like, fucked up. And this is a fuck up, but I feel like it's one where the only way you'd ever die to that is because you didn't know that was a rule. So everyone who dies to it is going to be like, oh, fucking hell, I didn't know about that. And that's just a bad experience, and I just want to eliminate those. So I don't like that can happen. So what I'm going to do is have them, I think, spawn off the grid. So they'll spawn in the empty space adjacent to a hex, and they'll just be like tiny and in the void, and then each turn they'll get bigger as they're kind of climbing up. It's not going to look a lot like they're climbing up, it's going to look like there's tiny enemies that just increase in size. But that means you'll know where they're coming from, and it means they don't take up any grid space, they're not going to, so it's a kind of a spaciousness bonus. And they're not going to spawn inside you, and if you're on the hex they're trying to climb up on, they just push you back. It doesn't hurt you, just like it will just knock you back. If it's like a peninsula and you're on there and they come from one side and push you off the other side, then you're dead. So watch out for that. But that's one where I feel like there's no rule to learn there, right? You see the enemy coming, you're standing right there, and there's a deadly drop behind you, like, you had that coming. I don't anticipate that happening much by surprise. So I'll do that. I definitely want to do new sound effects, because there's only 2 sound effects in the whole game. Like, I did one for blades, I did one for hammer. Actually, I did one for losing your shield as well. And then I just stopped there and got on with mechanics and wanted to finalise everything else first, so it could feel way, way better if I had sounds for everything. I need to improve the animation for hammering people a bit. It's a bit vague. You kind of, your hammer shoots out a little bit, you don't move at all, and they just explode, and the hammer doesn't actually touch them, and I want that to be a bit more physical. And so those are things I'm definitely going to do. I'm going to try that enemy spawning in the void thing, and I'm going to try new sounds. And then if I wanted to, the other direction I know it would be cool to explore is, what if the places enemy spawns are kind of fixed for 5 waves in a row? So then you can design your grid in a much more intentional way and say, I want guns at the back, and I want blades here, and I want repair stuff there. And that sounds really exciting, but I spent a long time on this already. I spent much longer than I intended to, so it might be kind of a future thing rather than, for this next build. This current build with the arrow in it, and that's kind of nearly complete, that I'd like some feedback on, will be linked in the description, so you can play it now. And hopefully I'll have like the actual finished thing pretty soon.